The Hindu Kush mountains did not care about the trident pinned to her chest. They did not care about the geopolitical chessboard, the rules of engagement, or the years of grueling, bone-breaking selection it took to become a Tier 1 operator. Up here, at 9,000 feet above sea level, the only things that mattered were gravity, barometric pressure, and the freezing, biting wind that threatened to seep through the seams of her snow camo smock. Chief Petty Officer Maya Vance lay perfectly motionless beneath a rock overhang. Her body pressed flush against the unforgiving Afghan granite. She had been in this hide for 34 hours. To the untrained eye, she was nothing more than a shadow cast by the jagged terrain. To the men in the valley 1,200 yards below, she didn't exist at all. That was why they called her Spectre. Maya's eye rested a fraction of an inch behind the glass of her Night Force ATAC-R optic. Mounted flawlessly atop her Mk-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, the weapon was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. Chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, beneath her gloved finger, the trigger was a hair trigger promise. Inside the chamber sat a 220-grain Sierra Matchking bullet, waiting in the absolute stillness of a cold bore. A cold bore shot is the first round fired from a clean, cold rifle. It is the most unpredictable, the most difficult to calculate, and almost always, the most important shot a sniper will ever take. You don't get a warm-up in this line of work. You don't get to walk your rounds onto the target. You get one squeeze, one heartbeat, one life. Down in the compound, a mud brick fortress nestled in a dry riverbed, 3 men stepped out into the blinding midday sun. Target acquired, Maya whispered, her voice a barely audible rasp over the encrypted bone conduction headset tucked behind her ear. Copy, Spectre, we have eyes, came the reply from her spotter. Petty Officer Miller, lying 2 feet to her right, staring through a high-powered spotting scope. Middle man, black turban, olive drab jacket, that's our ghost. Courier for the Haqqani network. Positive ID. Maya exhaled, a long, slow stream of fog escaping her lips. She settled deeper into the stock of the Mk-13, letting her cheek weld perfectly to the fiberglass. Now, the world shrank. The vast, sweeping expanse of the mountains disappeared. The politics faded. All that was left was the math. Range? Maya asked, her voice flat, devoid of adrenaline. Adrenaline was for amateurs. Adrenaline made your hands shake. 1,240 yards. Miller replied instantly. Density altitude is pushing 10,000 feet. The air is thin today. Spectre. Bullets gonna fly flat and fast. Maya mentally scrolled through her dope data on previous engagement. A notebook in her mind. She adjusted the elevation turret on her scope, listening to the crisp, tactile clicks. Wind? Miller paused, watching the mirage, the heat waves rippling off the rocks, and the subtle sway of the sparse camel grass down in the valley. We've got a full-value crosswind coming from the 9 o'clock. Call it 8 miles per hour at the muzzle. Picking up to 12 down in the draw. Hold right. 2.5 MOA. Minute of angle. MOA. It was the language of snipers. A measurement of accuracy that dictates that 1 MOA is roughly 1 inch at 100 yards. At 1,200 yards, being off by just 1 MOA meant missing the target by over a foot. Her father had taught her that. If you're off by an inch at 100 yards, Maya, you're off by a mile at 1,000. Integrity is the exact same way. One small lie ruins the man. Elias Vance's voice echoed in her mind, clear as a bell, cutting through the freezing Afghan air. A 25-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. A man who bled blue, but whose moral compass always pointed true north, even when the rest of the department was spinning out of control. He was the reason she enlisted. He was the reason she pushed herself through the living hell of buds, becoming one of the first women to ever wear the sealed trident. Maya pushed the memory aside. Focus. Compartmentalize. The mission first. Holding right. 2.5. Maya confirmed, shifting her reticle so the crosshairs hovered just off the target's left shoulder. Trusting the wind to push the heavy .300 Win Mag round directly into his center of mass. Send it, Miller whispered. Maya closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the thin, icy air. She let it out slowly. Halfway out, hold. She entered the respiratory pause. For 3 seconds, her body was completely dead. Her heart rate plummeted to 40 beats per minute. In the space between beats, the world stopped spinning. She applied 3 pounds of steady, rearward pressure to the trigger. Crack. The suppressed Mk-13 roared, bucking against her shoulder, kicking up a tiny plume of snow dust around the muzzle brake. The heavy, monolithic suppressor ate the flash and the worst of the concussive boom, turning the gunshot into a sharp, metallic whip crack that echoed into the vastness of the mountains. Through the scope, Maya watched the vapor trail, the displacement of air caused by the bullet traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. It arched beautifully through the sky, a violent, invisible arc of mathematics and physics. 1 second. 2 seconds. 2.5 seconds. Down in the valley, the man in the olive drab jacket suddenly folded backward, struck center mass by 3,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. He was dead before he hit the dirt. Impact. Target down. Good night, sweetheart, Miller muttered, not taking his eye off the glass. The other 2 men in the compound scrambled in a panic, having no idea where the shot had come from. They were firing blindly into the hills. Maya cycled the bolt of the Mk-13, the brass casing ejecting and landing in the snow with a soft hiss. The smell of burnt cordite filled her nostrils. She chambered a fresh round, her eye never leaving the optic, scanning for secondary threats. Spectre. Romeo Actual. The radio cracked. It wasn't the tactical operations center. It was the deep, gravelly voice of her commanding officer, Commander Hayes, calling directly from Bagram Airfield. Actual. This is Spectre. HVT is neutralized. RTB in progress. Maya replied, keeping her voice strictly professional. Hold your exfil, Spectre, Hayes said. There was a strange heaviness to his voice, a tone Maya had only heard when they lost one of their own on a deployment. I need you to secure your comms. Encryption level red. Maya felt a sudden, cold knot form in the pit of her stomach. It had nothing to do with the temperature. Encryption level red was reserved for highly classified intelligence or catastrophic personal emergencies. Comms secure. Sir, talk to me. There was a long pause on the other end. The static hissed over the satellite link. Maya, Hayes said, dropping her call sign. That was the second red flag. I'm pulling you out. There's a Blackhawk inbound to your secondary extraction point right now. You're going home. Sir, we have 3 days left on this rotation. Did something happen to the team? It's not the team, Maya. I just received a red file from the Red Cross and the Department of the Navy. It's your father. The wind howling over the ridge seemed to suddenly fade away. The world narrowed down to the earpiece pressed against her skull. Is he in the hospital? Maya asked, her voice tighter now, the legendary control of a Tier 1 operator slipping just a fraction. He's gone, Maya. I am so deeply sorry. A physical blow. It felt like she had taken a round to the ceramic plate in her vest. Elias Vance, the unbreakable oak tree of a man. Dead? It was impossible. He was only 58. He ran 5 miles a day. He was invincible. Heart attack? She managed to choke out. Commander Hayes sighed, a heavy, weary sound. The preliminary report from the Chicago Police Department just came over the wire. Maya, they're calling it a suicide. They found him in his cruiser, down by the lakefront. Service weapon. They're saying he was under investigation by Internal Affairs for missing cartel money. Over $2 million. Maya stopped breathing. The silence stretched on for 10 agonizing seconds. Miller looked over at her, his face pale, having caught the gist of the conversation through the bleed over of the comms. Suicide. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Elias Vance, the man who taught her the sacred geometry of the Moa, the man who told her that one small lie ruins a man, the man who had spent 25 years locking up the worst scum Chicago had to offer, suddenly turning dirty, stealing cartel cash, and taking the coward's way out? It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie. A poorly constructed, insulting lie. Maya, are you still there? Hayes asked gently. Maya reached up and unclipped her helmet strap. She looked out over the Hindu Kush, her gray eyes hardening into 2 chips of glacial ice. The grief hadn't hit her yet. The grief was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Right now, what filled her veins was something much colder. And far more dangerous. It was absolute, crystalline clarity. Someone had murdered her father. And whoever they were, they had made the fatal mistake of leaving his daughter alive. I copy. Actual, Maya said, her voice dropping an octave, devoid of any warmth or sorrow. It was the voice of the specter. Tell the pilot to keep the rotors spinning. I'm coming home. She reached down, picked up the spent .300 Win Mag brass casing from the snow, and slipped it into her pocket. The war in Afghanistan was over for her. The war in Chicago was just beginning. Chicago didn't weep for Detective Elias Vance. It just rained. It was that relentless, bone-chilling drizzle that blows off Lake Michigan, cutting through wool coats and sinking straight into your joints. The sky was the color of a bruised slate, pressing down on the sprawling expanse of Graceland Cemetery. A cop's funeral in this city is supposed to be a spectacle. A brotherhood in blue. There should have been a sea of uniforms stretching down the avenue. The haunting drone of bagpipes playing Amazing Grace, and a 3-volley rifle salute to honor a man who had given 25 years of his life to the badge. Elias got none of that. Because Elias died a dirty cop. Maya stood alone at the edge of the open grave, the rain beating and rolling off the pristine, crisp fabric of her navy dress blues. The gold trident pinned above her ribbons felt heavier today. She stood at parade rest, her spine rigid, her face an unreadable mask of stone. Across the damp grass, a pathetic cluster of maybe 10 people huddled under black umbrellas, a few distant relatives she barely knew, and a handful of plainclothes detectives from internal affairs, standing at the back, earning their paychecks by making sure the disgraced detective went quietly into the dirt. The department had officially stripped Elias of his honors pending the missing cartel money investigation. They treated him like a virus they needed to bury quickly before it spread. Then, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb. Maya's eyes, trained to catch the slightest anomaly in a landscape, locked onto the figure stepping out of the SUV. He was tall, built like a linebacker, wearing an immaculate, tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her father made in a month. He moved with the predatory grace of a man entirely too comfortable with violence. Captain Silas Thorne, commander of the Iron Star Tactical Unit. Thorne walked over, a large black umbrella shielding him from the drizzle. He stopped a few feet from Maya, looking down at the cheap, standard-issue casket. Chief Petty Officer Vance, Thorne said, his voice a smooth, gravelly baritone. It was the kind of voice that made politicians write blank checks and made suspects confess in interrogation rooms. I am truly sorry for your loss. Your father was a legend. Once. Maya didn't break her stance. She didn't look at him. Captain Thorne. It's a damn tragedy. Maya, truly. Thorne continued, stepping closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The pressure of the job, it gets to the best of us. The streets are a meat grinder. Elias just got chewed up. He made a mistake, took the cartel cash to pad his retirement, and the guilt ate him alive. I just wish he had come to me before he put his service weapon in his mouth. Maya finally turned her head. Her gray eyes met his. She didn't see a grieving commander. She saw micro-expressions, the slight tightness at the corner of his jaw, the manufactured sympathy in his eyes that didn't quite reach his pupils. My father was right-handed. Captain, Maya said flatly. Thorne blinked, the polished veneer slipping for a fraction of a second. Excuse me? The preliminary report said the entry wound was on the left temple. My father was right-handed. He also had a torn rotator cuff in his left shoulder from a foot pursuit in '08. He couldn't lift his left arm above his chest without wincing. Maya stepped half a pace forward, invading Thorne's personal space. The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy as the storm clouds above. My father didn't kill himself, Captain, and he didn't steal a dime. Thorne's jaw tightened. The sympathy vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. Grief makes us look for ghosts. Maya, don't go digging up graves that are already filled. Go back to Coronado. Serve your country. Let the dead rest. He gave her a curt nod, turned on his heel, and walked back to his Lincoln. Maya watched him drive away. Target identified, she thought. the sniper's instinct overriding the daughter's grief. 2 hours later, Maya unlocked the front door of her father's brick bungalow in the working-class neighborhood of Bridgeport. The house was suffocatingly quiet. It smelled of stale Folgers coffee, old pine floorboards, and Hoppy's No. 9 gun solvent. She walked through the living room. Everything was painfully normal. A half-read paperback was face down on the armchair. A grocery list sat on the kitchen counter: milk, eggs, coffee filters, dog food. You don't buy groceries and worry about coffee filters the day you plan to blow your brains out. Maya bypassed the living room and headed straight for the basement door. If Elias Vance had left her anything, a clue, a warning, a goodbye, it wouldn't be in a diary. It would be at his sanctuary. The basement was a meticulously organized workshop. Along the far wall sat his reloading bench, bathed in the harsh, white glow of a fluorescent shop light. Elias was an obsessive precision shooter. It was a trait he had passed down to his daughter. The bench was lined with RCBS rock chucker presses, digital powder scales, and neat, labeled rows of brass casings and copper-jacketed bullets. Maya slowly ran her fingers over the edge of the wooden bench. It was here that a 12-year-old Maya had learned the difference between a 168-grain and a 175-grain boat tail hollow point. It was here she learned that precision requires absolute truth. You can't lie to a bullet. You can't fake physics. She pulled up his stool and sat down. She scanned the bench. Her eyes, trained to spot a hidden sniper at 1,000 yards, swept over the organized clutter. Something was out of place. On the far right, sitting completely alone away from the neatly stacked ammo cans, was a single, green plastic MTM case. Maya flipped the latch and opened it. Inside sat a single row of .308 Winchester rounds. Maya picked one up. To anyone else, it was just a bullet. But to a Tier 1 sniper who had hand-loaded thousands of rounds, something felt wrong. She tossed it lightly in her palm. The weight was off, too light, and the center of gravity was wrong. She looked at the bottom of the casing. The primer pocket. The primer, the tiny explosive cap that ignites the gunpowder, was struck. It was a spent casing. But someone had painstakingly seated a fresh, unfired bullet into the neck of the brass to make it look like a live round. Maya's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She reached into the top drawer of the bench and pulled out a kinetic bullet puller, a tool that looked like a hollow plastic hammer. She placed the suspicious .308 round inside the puller, screwed the cap on tight, and whacked the hammer hard against the solid oak bench. Thwack! The kinetic energy dislodged the bullet from the brass neck. Maya unscrewed the cap and dumped the contents onto her palm. No gunpowder spilled out. Instead, a small, tightly rolled piece of gray foam fell into her hand. Maya unrolled the foam with delicate, trembling fingers. Resting in the center was a tiny, black micro SD card. "You paranoid, brilliant old man," she thought, a fierce, tight smile breaking across her face for the first time in days. She moved fast now. She grabbed her encrypted tactical Panasonic Toughbook from her duffel bag upstairs, booted it off a secure Linux drive that left no digital footprint, and slotted the SD card into the reader. There was only one file on the drive, an audio file labeled insurance.wave. Maya put in her earbuds and hit play. First, there was static, the rustle of fabric, and the heavy thrum of an engine, a dashcam or wire. Maya realized. Then, her father's voice came through, strained but defiant. "I found the ledger. Silas, you're not just skimming off the busts. Iron Star is acting as an assassination squad for the Reyes cartel. You're taking out their competition using police resources." Maya stopped breathing. A second voice crackled over the audio. Smooth, gravelly, unbothered. "Captain Silas Thorne. You're looking at it the wrong way. Elias, we're not working for them. We're taxing them. The city is a war zone. The brass doesn't care about us. The politicians hate us. And the public spits on us. Iron Star is just taking the spoils of war. $2 million. Elias, there's a duffel bag in the trunk with your name on it. Just walk away. I'm a cop, Silas, not a mercenary." Her father's voice growled, thick with disgust. "I'm taking this to the feds." A heavy sigh echoed through the recording. "I was hoping you wouldn't say that, old friend," Thorne said softly. "You always were too rigid for your own good. Say hello to your wife for me." There was the sound of a struggle. A muffled shout. The sickening crack of a pistol whipping against skull. Then, the heavy, dead weight of a body slumping against a car door. The recording cut out, leaving nothing but the hiss of digital static. Maya sat in the dimly lit basement, the static buzzing in her ears. The grief, the confusion, the lingering doubts, they instantly evaporated, incinerated by a white-hot, terrifying rage. Her father hadn't committed suicide. He was executed, and the men who did it were wearing badges, hiding behind the very law her father had sworn to protect. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought Elias Vance was just a lonely, disgraced cop with no one left to fight for his memory. They forgot about the daughter. Maya slowly pulled the earbuds out. She looked at the kinetic puller, the empty .308 casing, and the high-end precision rifle scope sitting in the cabinet. She wasn't an internal affairs investigator. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a Navy SEAL sniper. And her father had just painted a laser designator squarely on the chest of Captain Silas Thorne. Message received. Dad, Maya whispered into the empty room. She closed the laptop, the heavy click echoing like a chambered round. It was time to go to work. The first rule of urban sniper operations is simple. Never let the environment dictate your terms. You dictate the environment. Chicago's West Side, near the old industrial rail yards, was a graveyard of rusting steel and shattered concrete. It was a place the city had forgotten, which made it the perfect staging ground for men who operated in the shadows. Men like Captain Silas Thorne, and the 12 officers of the Iron Star Tactical Unit. Their headquarters wasn't a standard police precinct. It was a fortified, retrofitted motor pool surrounded by razor wire and high-definition pan-tilt zoom cameras. To the public, it was an unmarked equipment depot. To Maya Vance, it was a target-rich environment. Maya lay prone in the suffocating darkness of an abandoned meatpacking plant, exactly 340 yards north of the Iron Star compound. She had spent the last 4 hours constructing her hide. A sniper never sets up right at the window. That's how you get Skyland. Your silhouette painted against the glass for anyone to see. Instead, she was positioned deep inside the cavernous room, operating through a loophole, a small gap in the boarded-up window no larger than a grapefruit. The temperature inside the plant was hovering just above freezing. But Maya didn't shiver. She was wrapped in a mylar thermal blanket to mask her body heat from any FLIR, forward-looking infrared, scanners Thorne's men might have mounted on their patrol vehicles. She was a ghost, blending perfectly into the ambient thermal clutter of the decaying building. In front of her sat a spotting scope mounted on a low-profile tripod. And beside it, the glowing green screen of a modified Panasonic Toughbook running a software-defined radio (SDR) program. She wasn't here to pull a trigger. Not yet. A bullet ends a life. But intelligence wins a war. Before she could dismantle Thorne's empire, she needed to know its architecture. "Let's see what you boys are whispering about," Maya muttered to herself, her breath pluming in the freezing air. With a few keystrokes, she launched a micro-drone from a hole in the roof above her. It wasn't a commercial toy, it was a modified piece of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance tech, roughly the size of a sparrow. Painted matte black and virtually silent above 200 feet. On her screen, the drone's camera feed flickered to life, providing a bird's-eye view of the compound. 3 unmarked, up-armored Chevy Suburbans were parked in the courtyard. Men in black tactical gear were loading Pelican cases into the trunks. Maya switched her attention to the SDR software. The waterfall display on her screen cascaded with radio frequencies. Iron Star wouldn't be using the standard Chicago PD dispatch channels. Those were recorded and monitored by the brass. For their dirty work, they would be using encrypted, frequency-hopping tactical radios. But Maya had spent a decade hunting the most elusive terrorists on the planet. Cartel-funded cops were child's play by comparison. She deployed a localized spoofing algorithm, forcing their radios to bump down from 256-bit encryption to a standard Unencrypted VHF bandwidth for just a fraction of a second, long enough to clone their digital handshake. Suddenly, the static in her earpiece cleared. Voices bled through the digital noise. Affirmative. 2-1. We have the green light from the mayor's office. No patrol units in a 10-block radius. It was a voice Maya didn't recognize. A younger cop, sounding jittery. Stow the chatter, rookie, came a second voice. Deep, calm, and chillingly familiar. Captain Thorne, keep your heads on a swivel. The Reyes cartel expects this corridor cleared by midnight. We hit the safe house. We zero the targets. We secure the product. And we make it look like a rival gangland hit. Standard breach and clear. Maya's jaw clenched. Her father's recording was just the tip of the iceberg. Iron Star wasn't just taking bribes to look the other way. They were an active hit squad. They were using police intelligence, police weapons, and the shield of the law to murder the Reyes cartel's competition, solidifying a monopoly on the city's narcotics trade. Copy that, boss, the rookie replied. What about the collateral? There is no collateral in a war zone. Kid, Thorne's voice was devoid of any human empathy. Anyone inside that house is an enemy combatant. We leave no witnesses. Not again. We already had to clean up Vance's mess. I'm not doing it twice. Maya's heart rate spiked, a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline hitting her bloodstream. Vance's mess. They were talking about her father like he was a stain on a rug. Her finger instinctively drifted toward the empty space where a rifle should have been. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing her heart rate back down to 50 beats per minute. Discipline, Spectre. Anger gets you killed. Cold math keeps you alive. She typed furiously, recording the audio feed, backing it up to 3 separate, encrypted cloud servers. This was the proof. This was the nail in Thorne's coffin. But handing it to the FBI wouldn't be enough. Thorne had his hooks in the mayor's office. He would lawyer up, delay, and eventually slip away into the shadows. No, justice for Elias Vance wouldn't happen in a courtroom. It would happen in the crosshairs. Suddenly, the audio feed in her ear hissed violently. Down in the courtyard, Captain Thorne abruptly stopped walking. He held up a clenched fist, the universal tactical hand signal to freeze. The men loading the Suburban stopped dead. Through the spotting scope, Maya watched Thorne slowly turn his head. He wasn't looking at his men. He was looking out, up, directly toward the industrial park. Maya froze. Had she compromised the hide? Impossible. She was in deep shadow. Her lens was covered with a kill flash honeycomb filter to prevent glint. And her thermal signature was masked. Boss? What is it? A voice crackled over the radio. Thorne reached to his shoulder mic. Someone is on our frequency. We've got a localized signal bounce. Maya cursed silently. Thorne wasn't just a thug, he was a former Force Recon Marine. He recognized the slight degradation in his radio's signal quality caused by Maya's spoofing algorithm. He knew they were being monitored. Kill the comms. Go to hard line. Thorne barked, his voice urgent now. Deploy the sweeper. I want a full RF scan of a 2-mile radius. Now. The radio feed went dead. Down in the compound, a technician pulled a heavy, backpack-sized directional antenna from the trunk of a cruiser. They were actively pinging the environment, looking for the source of the drone's signal and Maya's laptop. It would only take them a few minutes to triangulate her position. The hunter was suddenly the hunted. Maya didn't panic. A Navy SEAL never panics. She moved with ruthless efficiency. She killed the power to the laptop, instantly severing the digital connection. She collapsed the spotting scope, shoved it into her tactical pack, and ripped the mylar blanket from the wall. She had less than 3 minutes before Thorne's men breached the perimeter of the meatpacking plant. 12 heavily armed tactical operators against one woman with a sidearm. Maya drew her Sig Sauer P226 Mk25 from her thigh holster, checking the chamber with a swift press check. A brass casing gleamed in the dim light. A full magazine of 9mm hollow points. It wasn't nearly enough firepower to take on a SWAT team. But she wasn't planning on a firefight. She was planning an exfiltration. She slipped out of the hide and moved silently down the rusted metal catwalk of the warehouse, her boots making absolutely no sound. Behind her, she heard the screech of tires outside the building. The heavy thud of combat boots hitting the pavement. Stack up. Breaching the loading dock, a muffled voice echoed from outside. A violent crash shook the building as the heavy steel doors were kicked open. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the swirling dust of the abandoned plant. Maya smiled grimly. Thorne had taken the bait. He knew she was here, but he didn't know who she was. He thought he was hunting a rival cartel scout, or a nosy private investigator. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about kicking a hornet's nest. Maya vanished into the shadows of the stairwell, fading away like the specter she was named after, leaving nothing behind but the cold, empty air. The Starlight Motel sat on a miserable, rain-slicked stretch of asphalt near Midway Airport. It was a cash-only, no questions asked kind of establishment, the perfect place for transient ghosts, desperate men, and women preparing for war. Room 114 smelled of stale cigarette smoke, damp carpeting, and the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil. Maya Vance sat cross-legged on the sagging mattress in the pitch black. She didn't have the lights on. She didn't need them. The intermittent, sickly sweet glow of a flickering red neon sign outside the window provided all the illumination her dilated pupils required. In her lap rested her Sig Sauer P226 Mk25. She was rhythmically loading 9mm hollow point rounds into a magazine. Click, clack, click, clack. The repetitive motion was a meditation. It was a grounding technique she had learned in Coronado, a way to keep the mind tethered to the present moment before the chaos of a breach. She knew they were coming. When she had slipped away from the meatpacking plant, she knew Captain Thorne's men had pinged the general radius of her signal. A man like Thorne didn't wait for a threat to develop, he eliminated it proactively. They would have scrubbed city surveillance cameras, tracked the license plate of the burner car she had rented, and narrowed down her location. They thought they were hunting a cartel spy who had gotten too close to their operation. They were about to walk into a meat grinder. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the low rumble of an incoming L train began to shake the cheap glass of the motel window. The screech of the steel wheels on the tracks was deafening, drowning out the sound of the city. It also perfectly masked the crunch of tactical boots on the gravel outside her door. Maya stopped loading the magazine. She slapped it into the magwell of the Sig, racked the slide to chamber around, and thumbed the decocker. The weapon was hot. She rolled off the bed silently, sinking into the shadows of the cramped bathroom alcove. This was her primary field of fire. In CQB, close quarters battle, the doorway is known as the fatal funnel. It is the most dangerous piece of real estate in a firefight. Whoever controls the angles outside the funnel dictates who lives and who dies. Outside, a heavy, gloved hand gripped the doorknob. Locked. A whisper bled through the thin dry wall. On my mark. 3, 2, breach. Crack. A hydraulic breaching ram shattered the deadbolt and tore the door frame cleanly off the wall. The door flew open, smashing against the interior wall with a violent thud. The beam of a high-lumen surefire weapon light sliced through the darkness of the room, cutting through the swirling dust. 4 men stacked up and poured into the room, moving with the practiced, aggressive fluidity of a SWAT team. They were clad in black tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and ballistic helmets. They carried short-barreled AR-15s. "Clear the bed! Clear the bathroom!" the point man shouted, his rifle sweeping over the empty mattress. They expected the target to be asleep, panicked, or scrambling for a weapon. They expected their violence of action to paralyze whoever was inside. They expected a victim. They didn't expect the specter. Maya didn't freeze. She operated inside their OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. By the time the point man realized the bed was empty, Maya had already initiated her assault from the bathroom shadows. She stepped out, perfectly balanced, both eyes open, the tritium night sights of her Sig Sauer glowing faintly green as she brought the pistol up. Pop pop. 2 suppressed 9mm rounds struck the point man squarely in the center mass of his Kevlar vest. The kinetic energy staggered him backward, throwing off his aim. Before he could recover, Maya transitioned the muzzle up 2 inches. Pop. The third round took him just beneath the brim of his ballistic helmet. The Mozambique drill, 2 to the chest. 1 to the head. The point man dropped like a stone. Contact left. The second man screamed, swinging his AR-15 toward the bathroom. Maya was already moving. A stationary target is a dead target. She lunged forward, closing the distance before the second man could acquire her in his optic. She swiped the barrel of his rifle offline with her left forearm, simultaneously driving the muzzle of her SIG into his exposed armpit, the gap in his body armor. She pulled the trigger twice. The man gasped, his weapon clattering to the floor as he collapsed. 2 down in less than 3 seconds. The third man panicked. He squeezed the trigger of his rifle in a wild, undisciplined burst. Searing 5.56 mm tracer rounds chewed through the drywall and shattered the motel mirror, raining glass down on the carpet. Maya dropped to a crouch, slipping entirely under his line of fire. She swept her right leg out, catching the third man behind the knees and taking his legs out from under him. As he hit the floor hard, knocking the wind out of his lungs, Maya drove the heel of her combat boot down onto his wrist. The bones snapped with a sickening crunch. He screamed, dropping his rifle. Maya kicked it across the room. Suddenly, the room was eerily quiet, save for the groan of the third man on the floor and the fading rumble of the L train outside. The fourth man, the rookie she had heard on the radio earlier, was backed against the shattered doorframe. His rifle was raised, but his hands were shaking violently. The tactical light mounted on his barrel danced erratically across the blood-splattered walls. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. He had come to do a mob-style hit on a sleeping target. Instead, he had just watched 3 heavily armored veterans get systematically dismantled by a phantom in the dark. Maya rose slowly from her crouch. She stood in the center of the room, her silhouette illuminated from behind by the red neon sign. The barrel of her SIG was pointed directly at the floor, perfectly relaxed. "Drop it," Maya said. Her voice wasn't a yell. It was calm, chillingly quiet, and carried the immovable weight of a direct order. The rookie swallowed hard. He looked at the bodies of his squadmates, then back to the woman standing amidst the carnage. He slowly lowered his rifle, letting it hang by its tactical sling. He raised both hands, trembling. Who the hell are you?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "Are you feds?" Maya stepped forward, closing the gap until she was only inches from his face. She reached out with her free hand and ripped the Iron Star tactical patch straight off his shoulder Velcro. "Tell Captain Thorne that Elias Vance didn't steal a dime," Maya whispered, her gray eyes locking onto his terrified gaze. "Tell him that I have the audio file from the night he murdered my father. And tell him that the men he sent tonight died for nothing." The rookie nodded frantically, sweat pouring down his face. Okay, I'll tell him. Please, I didn't know Elias. I just follow orders." Maya leaned in closer, the scent of gunpowder and cold rain clinging to her clothes. "You tell Thorne he has 24 hours to turn himself in to the FBI," Maya said, her voice dropping to a lethal purr. "Because if he doesn't, I'm coming for the rest of you." Are you a cop?" the rookie choked out, desperate to understand the nightmare he had just survived. Maya stepped back, holstering her weapon with a fluid, practiced motion. She looked at the blood on the floor, then back at the trembling boy in tactical gear. "I'm not a cop," Maya said, turning toward the open doorway, fading into the rain-swept Chicago night. "I'm a SEAL." The memory smelled like crushed autumn leaves, black coffee, and Hoppy's No. 9 gun solvent. "Don't pull the trigger, Maya. A pull is a jerk. A jerk is a miss." 12-year-old Maya lay on a canvas shooting mat in the sprawling golden fields of rural Illinois. Her small shoulder was bruised purple, pressed hard against the walnut stock of her father's heavy Remington 700 bolt-action rifle. Beside her, Elias Vance sat cross-legged in his worn flannel shirt, peering through a spotting scope at a paper target exactly 100 yards downrange. "Breathe in," Elias instructed, his voice a low, steady rumble that always made the world feel safe. "Let it half out. Pause. Squeeze." Young Maya held her breath. The crosshairs of the Leupold optic drifted slightly with her heartbeat. She waited for the pause between beats, just like he taught her. Then, she applied steady, Rearward pressure. Crack. The .308 Winchester round sent a violent shockwave through her tiny frame. She blinked away the recoil, quickly working the bolt to eject the smoking brass casing. High and right, Elias noted, not looking away from the glass. About 1 inch off the bullseye. You flinched, kiddo. You anticipated the recoil. Maya frowned, rubbing her sore shoulder. It's just an inch, Dad. It's still inside the red circle. In a hunting blind. That's still a hit. Elias lowered the spotting scope and looked at his daughter. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. He reached over and tapped the elevation turret on her scope. At 100 yards, Maya, an inch is 1 minute of angle. 1 moa. It seems small right now. But geometry doesn't forgive, and physics doesn't compromise. If your math is off by just 1 inch at 100 yards. What happens when your target is 1,000 yards away? Maya did the math in her head. I'd miss by 10 inches. Exactly, Elias said softly. You miss the target completely. You fail the mission. He reached out and rested his heavy, calloused hand on her shoulder. Integrity is the exact same way. Maya, it's a trajectory. One small lie, one tiny compromise in your morals today. It might seem like just an inch. But 10 years down the line? 1,000 miles down the road? You end up a completely different man. You end up lost. Never compromise your MOA, Maya, not for anyone. Maya blinked, and the golden fields of Illinois shattered, replaced by the harsh, flickering fluorescent light of an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath the Chicago Loop. She was sitting on a rusted metal crate, her tactical toughbook glowing in the damp darkness. The memory of her father's voice hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Never compromise your MOA. Elias had lived by that code, and it had gotten him killed. Maya pulled up the files she had decrypted from the micro SD card and cross-referenced them with the public financial records of the city. As a Tier 1 operator, she was trained to see patterns in chaos, to connect the dots of a terrorist network. But this wasn't Kandahar. This was her hometown. The web of corruption was staggering. Captain Silas Thorne wasn't just a rogue element. He was a highly paid attack dog. The money the Iron Star unit was extorting from the Reyes cartel wasn't just padding police pensions. Maya traced the shell companies and offshore accounts. The money was being funneled directly into the re-election campaign of the mayor of Chicago, as well as a half-dozen high-ranking judges and city aldermen. Thorne's tactical unit kept the cartel's rivals dead. The cartel kept the streets flooded with narcotics. And the politicians took their cut to ensure Iron Star never faced an internal affairs investigation that stuck. When Elias Vance found the ledger, he hadn't just threatened a dirty cop. He had threatened the entire political machine of the city. Maya closed the laptop, plunging the tunnel back into shadows. She realized now why Thorne had been so confident at the cemetery. He owned the system. If Maya went to the FBI with the audio recording, Thorne's political allies would bury the evidence in red tape. They would claim the audio was doctored, an AI deepfake, or inadmissible due to how it was obtained. Thorne would be placed on paid administrative leave. And a month later, Maya would quietly disappear in a random mugging. You can't fight a corrupt system using the rules they wrote. If she wanted to tear down Silas Thorne, she had to bypass the system entirely. She had to drag him out of his fortified precinct, away from his political armor, and into a domain where badges and bribes meant absolutely nothing. She needed to bring him into the wild. She needed to bring him into the sniper's world. Maya pulled a burner phone from her tactical vest. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 4 years. The line rang twice before a gruff, gravelly voice answered. Yeah? Gunny, Maya said. It's Spectre. There was a long pause on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. Well, I'll be damned. The Navy's favorite ghost. I heard about your old man. Maya, I'm sorry. It's a damn shame. Gunny Miller was a retired Marine Corps scout sniper who now ran a highly classified, off-the-books armory for private military contractors out of Gary, Indiana. If it went bang, Gunny could get it. I need a favor, Gunny, and I need it completely off the grid. Name it, kid. I need reach, Maya said, her voice dropping to a dead, emotionless flatline. I need extreme long range. I'm looking for a Chaytak M200 intervention. Chambered in .408. And I need matchgrade. Solid copper turned ammunition. Gunny let out a low whistle. A Chetak? Jesus. Maya, that's an anti-materiel rifle. That platform is designed to punch through engine blocks at 2 miles. What the hell are you hunting in Chicago? Monsters. Maya replied simply. I've got one in the vault. Gunny said after a moment. Fitted with a Night Force Beast 5-25x56 optic and a custom suppressor. It's yours, but Maya. Whatever you're about to do, once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. You cross that line, you're not a sailor anymore. Maya looked down at the empty .308 shell casing sitting on the metal crate, the casing her father had used to hide his final message. They already crossed the line. Gunny, I'm just calculating the windage for the return fire. The Chetak M200 intervention was not merely a rifle. It was a portable, shoulder-fired artillery piece. Weighing in at 31 pounds fully loaded. Its tubular aluminum chassis and massive, fluted barrel looked like something ripped from a sci-fi dreadnought. But its beauty lay in its brutal, uncompromising mathematics. It was chambered in the devastating .408 Chetak, a solid copper, aerodynamically perfect projectile designed to stay supersonic well past 2,000 yards. Maya lay prone on the unfinished concrete floor of a high-rise construction site in downtown Chicago. 72 stories above the pavement. The wind up here didn't just blow, it howled, tearing through the exposed steel girders like a chorus of ghosts. She was perfectly still, her eye pressed against the ocular lens of the Night Force Beast optic. Connected to the scope was a high-definition digital recording device, feeding a live feed directly to her toughbook. Her target was exactly 2,140 yards away, 1.2 miles. Down at the lakefront, nestled against the pristine waters of Lake Michigan, the Chicago Police Benevolent Association was holding an outdoor charity luncheon. White tents fluttered in the breeze. Politicians in tailored suits shook hands with high-ranking brass. And standing at the podium, basking in the flashbulbs of the local press, was Captain Silas Thorne. He looked the part of a hero. Crisp dress uniform, gold brass gleaming in the midday sun. A solemn, authoritative expression on his face as he spoke into the microphone. He was probably giving a speech about the dangers of the streets. Maybe even dedicating a moment of silence to the tragic passing of Detective Elias Vance. The absolute arrogance of it made Maya's blood run cold. Thorne felt safe. He was surrounded by 200 armed police officers. In broad daylight, in the middle of a major American city. He believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that he was currently living inside a mathematical equation. Distance. 2,140 yards. Maya whispered to herself, reading the data from her Kestrel weather meter. The tiny device tracked temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind speed, feeding it into a ballistic calculator. At this extreme distance, a bullet is in the air for over 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, physics does everything in its power to rip the bullet off its path. Maya wasn't just aiming at Thorne, she was aiming at where the Earth would be in 3.5 seconds. Factoring Coriolis effect, she muttered, because she was shooting north to south. The rotation of the Earth would actually move the target out from under the bullet during its flight. She had to adjust her aim 3 inches to the right just to compensate for the planet spinning. Spin drift. The rifling in the barrel twisted to the right, which meant the bullet would inherently drift to the right over a mile of flight. Another 4 inches of adjustment. Windage. This was the hardest part. The wind at her muzzle was blowing left to right at 10 miles per hour. But over the dark waters of the lake, it was swirling. She read the mirage, watching the invisible heat waves ripple. She dialed her windage turret. Click, click, click. Finally, she settled the reticle. The intersection of the crosshairs rested perfectly on the bridge of Silas Thorne's nose. If she applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger, the 419-grain copper bullet would punch through the microphone, shatter his skull, and exit the back of his head with enough remaining kinetic energy to pierce the engine block of the police cruiser parked behind him. Her finger rested gently on the curve of the trigger. Her breathing slowed. The world faded away. One squeeze, one heartbeat. It would be so easy. But a sniper's true weapon isn't the rifle. It's the mind. Killing Thorne here, in front of the press, would turn him into a martyr. It would allow the corrupt political machine he protected to sweep his crimes under the rug and launch a massive manhunt for a cop killer. Maya didn't want him dead. Not yet. She wanted him broken. She wanted him to know exactly what it felt like to be hunted. Maya moved her finger off the trigger. Instead, she reached over to her laptop and hit record. She let the video capture 10 seconds of Thorne speaking at the podium. The reticle of the sniper scope resting dead center on his face. The video included the telemetry data, the exact distance, the windage holds, the absolute proof that whoever was behind the glass had him dialed in perfectly. She stopped the recording. She quickly compressed the file and ran it through a series of encrypted proxy servers. Thanks to the rookie she had terrified the night before, she had Thorne's personal cell phone number. The rookie had talked, pouring out every detail of Iron Star's operation in exchange for his life. Maya attached the video to a text message. She typed a single, simple sentence below it. Message sent. Through the scope, Maya watched the podium. 2 seconds later, Thorne paused mid-sentence. He reached into the breast pocket of his dress uniform and pulled out his personal phone. Maya watched his face through the magnified glass. Thorne looked at the screen. He tapped play. Even from over a mile away, Maya could see the exact moment his world collapsed. The color completely drained from his face. His posture, previously broad and commanding, suddenly stiffened into rigid, primal panic. He looked up, his eyes scanning the impossible skyline of Chicago, searching desperately for a reflection, a glint, a shadow. He was looking for a ghost. He abruptly shoved the phone back into his pocket, muttered something hastily into the microphone, and practically sprinted off the stage, surrounded by his confused security detail. He was screaming orders, grabbing his men by their tactical vests, pulling them toward the armored SUVs. The apex predator had just realized he was prey. Maya smiled, a cold, humorless expression. She packed up the Chaitak, sliding the massive weapon into a nondescript Pelican golf club case. She wiped her digital footprint, packed her gear, and descended into the shadows of the stairwell. Down at the lakefront, speeding away in the back of an armored SUV, Captain Silas Thorne stared at the glowing screen of his phone, his hands trembling. Beneath the terrifying video of himself in the crosshairs, the text message read, "I am the MOA. You have until midnight. Bring the ledger to the barons. Bring your army, or the next round won't be digital. ******. The locals called it, the Barrens. It was a sprawling, 300-acre graveyard of rusted intermodal shipping containers sitting on the rotting edge of the Calumet River. Decades ago, it was the beating heart of Chicago's freight industry. Now, it was a desolate steel labyrinth. Canyons of corrugated metal stacked 4 stories high formed a chaotic, dead-end maze. At 11:45 p.m., the sky tore open. A massive Midwestern thunderstorm rolled off Lake Michigan, swallowing the city in absolute darkness. The rain didn't just fall, it unleashed in heavy, punishing sheets. The wind whipped through the narrow gaps between the shipping containers, creating a haunting, metallic howl. Lightning spider webbed across the black clouds, followed by the deep, bone-rattling boom of thunder. For the average person, it was a nightmare. For a Navy SEAL sniper, it was a tactical masterpiece. Maya lay prone inside the rusted cabin of a towering, derelict gantry crane, 150 feet above the ground. She was wrapped entirely in a specialized thermal reflective poncho, breaking up her silhouette and masking her body heat. The rain battered the roof of the cabin, but the barrel of her Chaitak M200 intervention protruded through a shattered glass pane, completely protected from the elements. She looked through her Night Force optic. The heavy rain was a gift. It created a noise floor, a baseline of deafening, ambient sound that would easily swallow the crack of a rifle. More importantly, the sudden drop in temperature and the sheer volume of cold water pouring over the steel containers created a thermal washout. It meant that down below, any infrared or heat-seeking optics would be virtually useless. The world had turned into a blurry, washed-out gray mess. At 11:55 p.m., headlights cut through the driving rain. Three up-armored black Chevy Suburbans rolled through the rusted chain-link gates of the Barrens. They didn't move like police cruisers, they moved like a military convoy in hostile territory. Staggered and tight. They parked in the center of a wide, open clearing surrounded by walls of shipping containers. The doors swung open. Captain Silas Thorne stepped out into the deluge. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform anymore. He was wearing full level 4 ceramic body armor over a black tactical uniform. In his right hand, he gripped a heavy aluminum halberd and briefcase. The ledger. The proof. Behind him, 11 men poured out of the vehicles. The Iron Star unit. They were terrified, but they were heavily armed. They carried Heckler & Koch HK-416 assault rifles, equipped with suppressors, infrared laser PEQ-15 boxes, and clip-on FLIR, forward-looking infrared, scopes. 4 of the men were carrying heavy ballistic shields. Thorne had brought an army to a sniper fight. He was relying on overwhelming firepower to survive. Form up. 360-degree perimeter. Thorne roared over the roar of the rain, his voice cracking with a manic edge. Check your thermals. Call out any heat signatures. If it moves, you light it up. Through the scope, Maya watched them scramble. They formed a tight defensive circle around the SUVs, their rifles pointing up at the catwalks, the cranes, and the container roofs. Boss, the thermals are useless. A panicked voice crackled over the unencrypted radio frequency Maya was monitoring. The rain is cooling the metal too fast. Everything is glowing gray. I can't see past 50 yards. Switch to night vision and active IR lasers. Thorne barked, his head swiveling wildly. Vance, I'm here. I brought the money. I brought the ledger. Show yourself. Thorne's voice echoed off the steel canyons, swallowed almost instantly by a massive crack of thunder. Maya didn't answer. She simply adjusted the parallax on her scope, bringing the engine block of the lead Suburban into razor-sharp focus. She wasn't going to negotiate. She was going to dismantle them piece by piece. The first rule of an ambush is to cut off the enemy's avenue of escape. Maya loaded a 419-grain solid copper .408 round into the chamber and smoothly locked the heavy bolt into place. She exhaled, letting the rhythm of the storm dictate her heartbeat. She waited for the sky to light up. A jagged fork of lightning struck a mile away. 1, 2. Maya squeezed the trigger exactly as the thunderclap hit. The Chetak roared, the massive muzzle brake venting hot gas into the damp air. But the sound was perfectly masked by the thunder. Down in the courtyard, the lead Suburban violently lurched. The heavy .408 round, traveling at over 2.900 feet per second, punched straight through the armored hood, shattered the cast iron engine block, and embedded itself deep in the transmission. Steam and black smoke instantly hissed into the cold rain. Contact! Contact! One of the officers screamed, firing a blind burst of 5.56 mm rounds into the darkness. Hold your fire. Damn it, where did it come from? Thorne yelled, ducking behind the rear wheel of the second SUV. Before they could orient themselves, Maya cycled the bolt. She shifted her reticle to the rear vehicle. Another flash of lightning, another rumble of thunder. Crack! The rear Suburban's front right tire exploded. The heavy, armor-piercing round continuing straight through the axle, snapping the steel shaft in half. The heavy vehicle dropped to the pavement with a sickening crunch. Panic erupted. The Iron Star unit realized they were trapped. Their vehicles were dead, blocking each other in. They were pinned in the center of a kill zone, and they hadn't even heard a gunshot. She's using the thunder. She's masking her shots. Thorne screamed, absolute terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Pop smoke. Break contact. Move into the containers. The tactical officers unclipped tear gas and smoke grenades from their vests, hurling them into the open courtyard. Thick, white, chemical smoke began to billow out, mixing with the heavy rain to create an impenetrable, blinding fog. Thorne grabbed the metal briefcase and bolted, diving between 2 rusted, red Maersk shipping containers. His men followed, abandoning the useless vehicles and scattering into the labyrinth. Up in the crane, Maya watched them run. This was exactly what she wanted. By forcing them into the narrow rows between the containers, she had neutralized their numerical advantage. They couldn't flank her. They couldn't use their ballistic shields effectively in the tight quarters. They were rats in a maze. And she was the hawk circling above. Maya grabbed the Chetak, slinging it over her back. She unclipped a heavy, specialized rope from the railing of the crane, wrapped it through her tactical carabiner, and stepped off the 150-foot drop. She fast-roped down into the abyss, the rain whipping against her face. She hit the corrugated steel roof of a shipping container with a soft, practiced thud, instantly unholstering her suppressed Sig Sauer P226. The game of long-range mathematics was over. It was time to get close. The top of the shipping containers formed a grid of slick, corrugated steel canyons. To the men on the ground, the maze was a claustrophobic nightmare of dead ends and shadows. To Maya, operating 3 stories above them, it was a chessboard. The rain continued to hammer down, washing away the chemical smoke Thorne's men had deployed. It didn't matter. Panic had already set in. And panic in a firefight is a contagion faster than any virus. Maya moved across the steel roofs with the terrifying, fluid silence of an apex predator. The 31-pound Chetak intervention was slung securely across her back. In her hands, the Sig Sauer P226 was an extension of her own nervous system. Below her, she could hear the heavy, uncoordinated splashing of combat boots. Hold the line. Keep your arcs of fire overlapping. Thorne's voice echoed from somewhere deep in the center of the maze. He was losing control. The pristine, military discipline of the Iron Star unit was dissolving into pure, survivalist terror. I can't see anything on the thermals. Boss, the ambient temp is completely washed out. A panicked voice replied over the comms. Maya stopped at the edge of a red Maersk container. She dropped to one knee, the water pooling around her boots. Directly below her, in a narrow alleyway between 2 towering stacks of steel, a 4-man fire team was sweeping forward. They were moving in a diamond formation, their suppressed HK-416s scanning the shadows. They were hugging the wall of the container, believing the heavy, reinforced steel would protect their flank. They don't understand the math, Maya thought coldly. She didn't use the pistol. A 9mm round wouldn't penetrate the steel roof. Instead, she smoothly unslung the massive Chetak M200. She didn't bother extending the bipod. She rested the heavy fluted barrel directly onto her tactical pack to absorb the recoil. Pointing the muzzle straight down at a steep 45-degree angle, a technique known as plunging fire. She didn't need the optic for this. She had the geometry mapped out in her head. A standard 5.56mm police rifle round will fragment when it hits heavy steel. A 419 grain, solid copper .408 Chetak round, traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, treats corrugated steel like wet cardboard. Maya visualized the 4 men directly beneath the steel plating under her barrel. She calculated the angle of deflection. She racked the massive bolt. Chambering around, the metallic clack was swallowed by a crack of thunder. Breathe in, half out, hold. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked like a mule, the concussive blast shaking the rain right out of the air. The heavy copper projectile punched cleanly through the reinforced steel roof of the container. But the bullet wasn't the only thing that killed. When a high-velocity round pierces heavy steel, it creates, spalling, hundreds of razor-sharp fragments of superheated metal that explode inward like a shotgun blast. Down in the alley, the roof of the container violently ruptured outward. The .408 round struck the lead officer directly in the Kevlar helmet, dropping him instantly. The localized storm of jagged steel shrapnel shredded the tactical vests and exposed arms of the 2 men behind him. Screams of agony tore through the rain. "Sniper! Fire from above!" the surviving officer shrieked, blindly pointing his rifle toward the sky and holding down the trigger. Tracer rounds chewed into the lip of the container, showering Maya with sparks. She didn't flinch. She simply rolled 2 feet to her left, racked the bolt, and fired a second plunging shot through the roof. The screaming stopped. Maya slung the Chetak and kept moving. 4 down, 8 to go. Thorne heard the deafening roar of the anti-materiel rifle. He knew immediately what it was. He had served in Fallujah. He knew the terrifying acoustic signature of heavy sniper fire. She's shooting right through the boxes. Thorn roared into his radio. Cover is negated. I repeat, cover is negated. Do not hug the walls. Move to the center of the alleys. It was the right tactical call. But it was exactly what Maya wanted him to do. By forcing them into the center of the narrow corridors, she had stripped them of their shadows. They were now completely exposed from above. Two officers, desperate to escape the kill zone on the ground, found a rusted access ladder welded to the side of a container. "We're taking the high ground," one of them yelled, slinging his rifle and scrambling up the wet, slippery rungs. Maya heard the metallic rattle of the ladder. She sprinted silently across the adjoining roof, leaping a 4-foot gap between the containers, and landed softly just as the first officer's head breached the edge of the roof. He looked up, expecting to see an empty expanse of steel. Instead, he saw the specter. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped into the fatal funnel, her Sig Sauer already raised. Pop pop. 2 suppressed 9mm rounds caught him center mass. He fell backward, colliding heavily with the officer climbing beneath him. Both men plummeted 20 feet to the hard concrete below in a tangle of limbs and tactical gear. 6 down. The psychological warfare was absolute. The Iron Star unit wasn't fighting a person anymore, they were fighting the environment. The rain, the thunder, the darkness, and the terrifying realization that nowhere was safe. The reinforced steel that was supposed to protect them was being turned into shrapnel. "Boss, we gotta pull back." A terrified, trembling voice came over the radio. It was the rookie Maya had spared at the motel. "We're getting slaughtered. She's a ghost." "Nobody pulls back," Thorn snarled, his voice tinged with a desperate, animalistic fury. He was huddled in a clearing with his 3 remaining men. The aluminum briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield. "She's just one woman. Put rounds downrange. Suppress the high ground." Maya stood at the edge of the container, looking down into the clearing. She was 60 yards away from Silas Thorn. The rain washed the blood from her knuckles. She unslung the Chaytak one last time. She flipped down the bipod legs, resting them securely on the edge of the steel roof. She settled her cheek against the stock and peered through the Night Force optic. The crosshairs rested perfectly on Captain Thorn's chest. She had him. The wind was a non-factor at this range. The rain wouldn't deflect a bullet this heavy. All she had to do was apply 3 pounds of pressure, and the corrupt heart of the Iron Star unit would stop beating forever. "One small lie ruins the man." Her father's voice echoed in the back of her mind. Maya's finger tightened on the trigger. But then, she saw the metal briefcase. The ledger. The undeniable proof that linked Thorn, the mayor, and the Reyes cartel. If she blew Thorn to pieces right now, the politicians would still win. They would blame the massacre on a cartel hit, cover up the ledger, and her father's name would remain forever stained. Killing Thorn was the easy way out. It wasn't the right way. Maya shifted the crosshairs 2 inches to the right. Crack. The .408 round tore through the heavy thunderstorm. It didn't hit Thorn. It struck the heavy aluminum handle of the briefcase he was clutching. The sheer kinetic energy of the impact ripped the case violently out of his hands, shattering the lock and spinning the metal box like a top. It slammed into the concrete, bursting open. Hundreds of waterlogged, rain-soaked pages, financial records, bank transfers, extortion dates, spilled out into the puddles, blowing wildly in the wind. Thorn screamed, dropping to his knees, staring in utter shock at his ruined empire scattered across the wet pavement. Maya racked the bolt, the empty casing ejecting into the darkness. She keyed her radio, broadcasting on Thorn's unencrypted frequency. Captain Thorn, Maya's voice, cold and devoid of any human mercy, echoed directly into his earpiece. "Look up." Thorn slowly lifted his head, the rain pouring down his face. High above him, illuminated by a brilliant, jagged flash of lightning, stood the silhouette of the specter. The massive barrel of the Chaytak pointed directly at his soul. "The hunt is over," she whispered into the comms. "Now, we talk." The rain was beginning to slow, turning from a deafening roar into a steady, freezing drizzle. The barren smelled of wet rust, pulverized concrete, and the sharp, sulfurous tang of spent cordite. Captain Silas Thorn remained on his knees in the puddles, staring at the ruined, waterlogged pages of his ledger. His empire, the extortions, the political payoffs, the blood money from the Reyes cartel, was literally dissolving into the mud. Around him, the surviving members of the Iron Star unit were broken. 2 were groaning in the shadows, neutralized by the spalling. The rookie, his weapon abandoned on the asphalt, was backing away toward the perimeter fence, his hands raised in surrender to the empty night. The unit's absolute faith in their commander had been shattered by a single, unseen sniper. A heavy metallic clack echoed through the canyon of shipping containers. Thorne snapped his head up. Maya Vance stepped out from the shadows of a blue Maersk container. 30 feet away, she didn't look like a grieving daughter. And she didn't look like a cop. She looked like the Grim Reaper in tactical gear. The massive Chaitak M200 intervention was slung securely across her back, the barrel still radiating heat into the cold air. In her right hand, she held her Sig Sauer P226, angled down in a low ready position. Thorne slowly pushed himself to his feet. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his ceramic body armor. He wiped the rain from his eyes, a bitter, jagged laugh escaping his lips. "I underestimated you," Thorne rasped, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "I thought you were just a heartbroken kid looking for closure. But you're exactly like him, aren't you?" Elias couldn't leave well enough alone, either. Maya didn't close the distance. She stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch. "He wasn't looking for closure," Maya said, her voice cutting through the damp air like a scalpel. "He was looking for justice. You just forgot what that word meant." Thorne shook his head, taking a slow, calculated step sideways. His hands were empty, but his eyes were darting, assessing the angles. "Justice? Wake up, Maya. You've been overseas too long. You think this city gives a damn about justice? Chicago is a war zone. The cartels have better guns, better lawyers, and more money than the entire police department. We were losing. So you joined them," Maya replied flatly. "We taxed them," Thorne roared, the polished veneer of the decorated captain finally cracking, revealing the desperate thug underneath. "We took the spoils. The brass didn't care about us. The politicians used us as scapegoats every time the murder rate spiked. Iron Star did what had to be done. We cleaned the streets our way. And we got paid for the blood we shed. Your father, Elias, he was a dinosaur. He believed in a badge that doesn't mean anything anymore. He believed in the MOA," Maya said softly. "He believed that one small compromise ruins the whole trajectory. You compromised, Silas. You became the exact thing you swore to hunt." Thorne sneered. He let his right hand drift slowly toward the small of his back. Maya's eyes tracked the micro-movement immediately. He had a secondary weapon, a holdout piece tucked behind his tactical belt. "You think you've won?" Thorne spat, gesturing to the scattered, ruined ledger pages. "You destroyed the paper trail. You just shot up half a dozen decorated police officers. When the sun comes up, you're not going to be a hero. Maya, you're going to be a domestic terrorist. I still have the mayor on speed dial. I still have the union. I'll spin this. I'll bury you right next to your old man." Maya finally smiled. It wasn't a happy expression, it was a cold, terrifying baring of teeth. She reached up with her left hand and tapped a small, rectangular black box mounted to the chest rig of her plate carrier. A single, solid green LED light was glowing on its surface. "You're right about one thing, Captain," Maya said. "The paper trail is ruined. But I didn't come here to steal your ledger. I came here to make you talk." Thorne frowned, his eyes locking onto the green light. "What is that?" "It's a military-grade, encrypted broad-spectrum transmitter," Maya explained, her voice entirely devoid of adrenaline. "I spoofed your comms earlier tonight. But I didn't just listen. I bridged your frequency. For the last 20 minutes. Every order you gave to kill me. Every panicked scream from your men. And everything you just confessed to about the Reyes cartel. It hasn't just been recording." Thorne's face went completely pale. "It's been live streaming," Maya finished. The silence that followed was absolute. "I routed the feed directly to the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force," Maya continued, taking one slow step forward. "I also sent it to the state's attorney, the local news desks, and the Internal Affairs Division. Right now, there are probably 50 federal agents mobilizing. The mayor can't save you, Silas, because by the time the sun comes up, the whole world is going to know that Iron Star is a cartel hit squad. And they'll know that you murdered Elias Vance. Thorne's chest stopped heaving. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His political armor, his untouchable status, the narrative he had so carefully crafted, it was all gone. Burned to the ground by a single, encrypted radio frequency. He had nothing left. A cornered animal has nothing left to lose. Thorne's eyes darkened, the desperation giving way to a feral, suicidal rage. If I'm going down, Spectre, Thorne hissed, his hand gripping the hidden handle of his secondary weapon. I'm taking his legacy with me. Thorne ripped a subcompact Glock 27 from the small of his back, bringing the muzzle up in a desperate, last-ditch draw. But he was fighting a Tier 1 operator. He was fighting the Spectre. Maya didn't even blink. Action is always faster than reaction. But Silas Thorne wasn't just reacting, he was fighting from a place of blind, undisciplined panic. Maya Vance, on the other hand, was operating purely on a decade of Tier 1 muscle memory. She didn't think, she didn't blink, she simply executed the fundamentals. As Thorne's hand cleared his waistband, bringing the subcompact Glock 27 up to bear, Maya's Sig Sauer P226 was already rising. She didn't look at Thorne's face. Her visual focus locked instantly onto the front sight post of her pistol, perfectly bisecting the rear notch, superimposed directly over the center of Thorne's Kevlar vest. But Maya knew the armor would stop a 9mm round. She adjusted her grip by a fraction of an inch, raising the muzzle exactly 2 degrees. Crack! A single, suppressed shot snapped through the freezing drizzle. Thorne's weapon fired a wild, errant round into the asphalt as his body violently jerked backward. Maya's 9mm hollow point had bypassed the heavy ceramic plate entirely, striking Thorne perfectly in the exposed juncture of his clavicle and throat, the apricot, as snipers called it. The central nervous system shot. The corrupt captain collapsed hard against the wet concrete, the stolen Glock clattering uselessly out of his grip. He stared up at the swirling, stormy sky, his breathing a wet, ragged rattle that lasted only a few seconds before fading into the ambient noise of the rain. The apex predator of Chicago's underworld was dead. Maya didn't lower her weapon immediately. She kept her sights trained on him, scanning for movement, scanning the shadows for the remaining Iron Star officers. But the fight was completely gone from them. The rookie who had backed against the fence sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands, waiting for the end. In the distance, bleeding through the rumble of the fading thunderstorm, came a new sound. It wasn't the deep, rolling thunder. It was the high, piercing wail of sirens, dozens of them, approaching from the north, south, and west. The FBI had received the broadcast. The state police were moving in. Maya finally lowered her Sig Sauer. She engaged the decocker and slid the weapon smoothly back into her thigh holster. She walked over to where Thorne lay. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She just felt a profound, heavy emptiness. The math was balanced. The trajectory had been corrected. She reached down, picked up the scattered, waterlogged pages of the cartel ledger, and placed them cleanly onto Thorne's chest for the feds to find. By the time the first armored FBI Bearcat smashed through the gates of the Barrens, sweeping the courtyard with blinding searchlights, the Spectre was already gone, swallowed by the shadows and the rain. 3 weeks later, the sky over Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia was a brilliant, unblemished blue. The air was crisp, carrying the quiet, hallowed weight that only this sacred ground could hold. The fallout in Chicago had been seismic. The audio files, the decrypted ledger, and the live-streamed confession of Captain Silas Thorne had triggered the largest federal corruption sweep in the city's history. The mayor had resigned in disgrace. Currently awaiting federal indictment, 5 judges and dozens of officers linked to the Iron Star unit were behind bars. The Reyes cartel's operations in the Midwest had been crippled overnight. And most importantly, the name of Detective Elias Vance had been entirely cleared. He was no longer a disgraced, dirty cop who took the coward's way out. The FBI had officially ruled his death a line-of-duty homicide. He was a whistleblower, A hero who had died protecting the city he loved from the monsters hiding inside its own walls. Because of his exoneration, and his prior honorable service in the United States Marine Corps before joining the police force, Elias had been granted his final resting place among the nation's greatest warriors. Chief Petty Officer Maya Vance stood at rigid attention beside the pristine white marble headstone. She was wearing her navy dress whites, the fabric sharp and immaculate, the gold trident gleaming proudly above her ribbons. She listened to the sharp, synchronized crack of the rifle detail as they fired the ceremonial three-volley salute. It was the honor her father had been denied in Chicago. A lone bugler stood on the rolling green hill, the haunting, mournful notes of taps drifting over the endless rows of white markers. Two Marines in dress blues meticulously folded the American flag that had draped Elias's casket. Their white-gloved hands moving with absolute precision. An officer stepped forward, turning to Maya, and presented the folded triangle of stars and stripes. On behalf of the President of the United States Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, the officer recited softly, "Please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." Maya accepted the flag, holding it tight against her chest. "Thank you, sir." The crowd of dignitaries, federal agents, and a few honest cops who had flown in from Chicago slowly dispersed, leaving Maya alone with her father. She knelt in the soft grass. She traced the engraved letters of his name on the marble. Elias Vance, beloved father. He held the line. "You were right, Dad," Maya whispered, her voice tight with the grief she had finally allowed herself to feel. 1 inch at 100 yards, it changes everything. I didn't let them change the math. I kept the MOA. She reached into the pocket of her dress whites. She pulled out the massive, solid copper, spent casing of the .408 Chaitak round she had fired at the Barons, the shot that had shattered Thorne's briefcase and broken his empire. She placed the heavy brass casing gently on top of the white marble headstone. A silent, eternal tribute from one warrior to another. Maya stood up, her spine perfectly straight. She snapped a crisp, flawless salute to the grave. She held it for 3 full seconds. Then, she executed a sharp about-face. Her leave was over. Her team was waiting for her back in Coronado. There were other missions, other shadows, other storms waiting on the horizon. Maya Vance walked down the rolling green hills of Arlington, her white uniform stark against the morning sun, fading into the distance, a specter returning to the wind.